It was 2:47 on a Tuesday afternoon when I watched Karen Pruitt commit a federal felony in broad daylight, wearing a navy blazer and an HOA pin. She was at my mailbox. The flap was open. My mail was in her left hand. She looked up, saw me on the porch, and did not flinch. She tucked a manila folder higher under her arm. Black marker on the front. 2 words in her own handwriting. HOA inspection, and said, calm and clipped, the way she had said it to half the widows on this street. "Cho business, your mailbox is community property until I clear it." She pointed at my front door, where her fresh orange notice was still taped to the wood. $250 a day in fines for obstructing mailbox compliance review. Her signature at the bottom. I took one slow sip of coffee, because I wanted to remember her sentence word for word. She had no idea, she had just said it to the one man on this street who used to put people exactly like her in federal prison. That was the 3rd Tuesday in a row. Karen Pruitt was 61 years old, president of the Maple Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. For 11 years running, her husband was rarely home. Her children were grown. The HOA was, by any honest reading, the only thing she still ran. And so she ran it the way other people run small countries. She flipped through my envelopes like a TSA agent, working a suspicious carry-on. She held one up to the sunlight to read through the paper. She slid 3 pieces into the manila folder under her arm and turned back toward me with a faint, satisfied tightness around the mouth. I did not raise my voice. I have never been the kind of man who raises his voice when something already belongs to me. "Ma'am," I said, "may I ask which envelope you took from this box last week?" She smiled. It was the kind of smile a person gives a cashier when they're about to say something cruel. "I don't track every piece of correspondence. I review on behalf of the community." She lifted her chin. "You moved here 8 months ago. I run this neighborhood. There is no such thing as a mailbox compliance review." Karen had invented it. She had typed it onto HOA letterhead. She had designed herself and printed it at the clubhouse on a community printer the rest of the homeowners had paid for. There is, however, such a thing as Title 18 United States Code. Section 1708, theft of mail up to 5 years federal. I had spent 28 years of my life enforcing that one. I had trained federal agents to recognize the exact body language she was using on my porch, the clipboard, the casual confidence, the absolute certainty that no one in a quiet suburb would ever check the actual statute. Karen pointed again at the orange notice on my door. "That fine is active. You're at $250 a day until I clear your inspection." I let the sentence sit behind her. Just over her left shoulder, my Ring camera blinked above the door frame. She had never once looked up at it. Not today, not last Tuesday. Not the Tuesday before for 6 weeks. That camera had been streaming in the background to a federal inbox. She didn't know that, yet I'll take that under advisement. I said. She turned manila folder under her arm, my mail still inside it, and walked back across the cul-de-sac toward her own front door, the way a person walks when they believe the matter is closed. I watched her go. I did not chase her. I did not call out. I did not pull out a phone. Inside, my coffee was still warm. I set the mug on the counter beside the small, black logbook I had been keeping since the first envelope went missing. 6 weeks, 43 entries. 3 other houses, 1 Social Security letter, 1 IRS notice, 11 wedding cards, 1 bank statement, 1 mortgage stub, from an 81-year-old widow who had not missed a payment in 23 years. I opened the logbook to the next clean line and wrote the date, the time, and the word subject, removed 3 pieces. Manila folder marked HOA inspection. Repeated prior statement for bottom. Then I closed the book. The doorbell camera blinked once the way it always did when motion ended on the porch. I thought about the federal inbox. I thought about the colleague I had not formally called in 6 years, who had read every single one of those 43 entries within 20 minutes of receiving them. I thought about a phrase he had used the last time we'd spoken on the phone. "Set the trap, get us a clean catch." The trap had been set 10 days ago. The catch, I checked the time on the kitchen clock. 2:51 p.m. The catch had just walked across the cul-de-sac with a manila folder full of marked decoy mail, holding it against a navy blazer that was about to be photographed under federal lighting. That was the thing about Karen Pruitt. She had been watching this street for so long that it had genuinely never occurred to her that someone finally was watching back. She was about to find out in the next few minutes exactly who. I had not moved to Maple Ridge Estates to fight anyone. I had moved there to retire. 8 months earlier, I had signed the deed on a small ranch house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. 2 bedrooms, a covered porch, a magnolia in the front yard, and a garage just deep enough for a fishing boat. I had been promising myself for 30 years. My wife had passed 4 years before. My daughter lived 2 states away. My granddaughter was 9, played striker on a Saturday morning soccer team, and called me every Sunday at 7. That was the life I had been planning. Coffee on the porch, tackle box in the trunk. No badge, no case file. No phone ringing at 3 in the morning about a postal employee who had been intercepting checks from a nursing home. I had locked one steel case on the top shelf of my office closet on the day I moved in, and I had told myself I would not open it again. The case held my retired credentials from the United States Postal Inspection Service, 28 years of work reduced to a leather wallet, a federal ID with a photo of a younger man and a single type sheet, listing the cell numbers of 7 colleagues who were still active. One of those numbers belonged to a friend I had trained as a junior inspector in 2-3, who had moved up through the ranks and was now a senior agent at the USPS Office of Inspector General. I closed that case on a Tuesday in March. I had not opened it again until the week the trap went live. In between, I met Karen Pruitt. I met her technically on my second day in the neighborhood. I was unloading boxes from a rental truck when a woman in a navy blazer walked up my driveway. Carrying a clipboard, introduced herself as the HOA board president and told me before she told me her name that my moving truck was in violation of Section 4.2 of the Maple Ridge Estates Covenants and would need to be relocated within 40 minutes, or we'd have to escalate. That was the word she used. Escalate on a man unloading dish boxes. I moved the truck. I smiled. I said thank you. I have always believed in being polite to the kind of person who treats politeness like surrender. In the weeks that followed, I learned the shape of Karen's empire, the way you learn the shape of a town when you've been assigned to a new field office. By listening, by watching, by taking notes. I never showed anyone. Maple Ridge Estates was 96 homes. Karen had been board president for 11 of those homes' lives. Her husband was a regional manager somewhere in logistics. Gone 4 nights a week, her 2 children had grown and gone. Whatever ambition she had once had for any other arena had compressed itself over years into the only thing left in front of her, a subdivision of 96 houses she had decided somewhere along the way were hers to run. She did not, on paper, have very much power. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions of Maple Ridge Estates ran to 41 pages and granted the board narrow authority over architectural changes, lawn maintenance standards, and a small set of community amenities. Nothing in those 41 pages gave Karen the right to do what she had been doing, but Karen had figured out 11 years in that nobody in a quiet suburb actually reads the covenants. Most homeowners signed at closing, filed the document in a drawer beside their warranty paperwork, and trusted that the woman in the navy blazer with the clipboard knew what she was talking about when she said a flag holder violated visual standards. They took the flag holder down. When she said a garden gnome was non-conforming, they removed the gnome. When she sent an orange notice, they paid Mrs. Alvarez. The 81-year-old widow who lived 4 doors down from me had paid $1,800 in fines over the previous 2 years. The fines were for a brass flag holder her late husband had mounted beside the front door. In 2009, Karen had decided in the 11th year of her presidency that the flag holder was non-conforming. Mrs. Alvarez had paid because she was afraid that if she didn't, Karen would put a lien on the house, and the house was the only thing her husband had left her. The Winds 2 blocks over had been fined for what Karen's notice called non-conforming garden gnomes. There were 3 of them in a flower bed. 6 inches tall, a young, single mother on the corner had been told in writing that her daughter's chalk drawings on the driveway violated visual conformity standards and would result in escalating fines if not removed before sundown. The drawings were of unicorns. 11 years of this 96 homes. A spreadsheet of small humiliations. Karen had been quietly compounding into the kind of authority she had never earned anywhere else in her life. Then in the spring before I moved in, she had announced her newest initiative, the Mailbox Compliance Initiative. The first time I read the flyer, I had to read it twice to be sure I was reading it correctly. The flyer claimed that the HOA had the right to inspect mailbox paint, mailbox flags, mailbox alignment, and in a clause buried at the bottom, any improperly addressed mail or correspondence that could affect property values within the community. That last clause had no legal basis whatsoever. Karen had written it herself, the way she had written everything else. The mailbox at the end of every driveway in Maple Ridge Estates had been approved by the United States Postal Service. Under federal regulation, the moment a mailbox is approved by USPS, it is no longer a private object subject to local control. It is part of the federal mail system. The HOA had no more right to open one of those boxes than I had to walk into the Maple Ridge clubhouse, take a stack of cash from the petty cash drawer, and call it a community fee inspection. I knew that because I had spent 28 years arresting people who had pretended otherwise. I did not say any of this out loud. Not for 8 months I sat on my porch in the mornings and watched Karen drive her white SUV up and down the cul-de-sac. At the same hour every Tuesday, clipboard on her passenger seat, the orange notices stacked beside it. I made small talk with my neighbors. I learned the names of the missing envelopes before I told anyone the missing envelopes mattered. I started a small black logbook in my kitchen and dated the first entry. The second week of January, I called no one. I did not open the steel case. I had spent 28 years watching people abuse a position of trust, and I knew the pattern by the second week of January. The only question I had not yet answered, sitting on that porch with my coffee, was how long I was willing to let her keep digging before I let the federal government meet her at her own front door. 6 weeks before the Tuesday, Karen walked across the cul-de-sac with marked decoy mail in a manila folder. Mrs. Alvarez knocked on my front door at 9:20 in the morning, and she was crying. She was holding a torn-open envelope in both hands. "Mr. Calloway." She said she always called me Mr. Calloway. 81 years old, 4'11". A navy cardigan she had owned since the Carter administration. "I'm losing my mind. I think I'm losing my mind." I asked her to come inside. I made her tea. She put the envelope down between us with shaking hands. It was an adjustment letter from the Social Security Administration. 3 weeks late, half shoved into the wrong mailbox. The seal across the back had been cut clean. Single blade, the kind of cut a person makes when they want to be able to reseal the envelope. I had seen that cut about 400 times across 28 years. Mrs. Alvarez did not need to know that I waited 3 weeks. She said I thought maybe my mind was going. I poured her another cup. I told her gently that her mind was fine. That night after she left, I went out to my own mailbox. My monthly bank statement, the one that had arrived on the same Friday for 11 months, was missing. Second month in a row, I went inside and pulled 6 weeks of ring footage. It took 40 minutes to find what I was looking for, because Karen Pruitt was thorough about timing. She came on Tuesday. She came at 2:47. Give or take 3 minutes. When the cul-de-sac was at work or asleep, she held her clipboard at chest height to block her face from any neighbor who happened to glance out a window. She did not look up at the small camera mounted at her own height above my front door because it had genuinely never occurred to her that a man 8 months into retirement might have one. I watched her open my mailbox on the third Tuesday in February. I watched her take an envelope. I watched her walk away with it. Under the clipboard, I made a decision that night slowly. I would speak to her once in public, politely with witnesses, and I would let her hand me the rest of the case herself. The community pool opened the following Saturday. Karen would be there. Karen was always there. She liked the pool because it was the one place in Maple Ridge Estates where she could sit in a deck chair and watch every family in the neighborhood pass by in swimsuits, and she liked the leverage that gave her. I went on Saturday at noon. Polo shirt and khakis, no logbook. No phone out, a single folded sheet in my back pocket. A printout of Title 18, Section 1708. The relevant subsection underlined. She was at the deep end holding court with 2 of her board allies. About a dozen homeowners were within earshot. A young couple I had not yet met. A retired engineer named Dale, who had nodded at me twice in 8 months. The Hendricksons, the Wins. And 2 teenage lifeguards being paid to look bored. I walked over. I did not raise my voice, ma'am. I said I'd like to ask you something in front of these neighbors, so no one has to repeat it later. Karen's smile went thin, of course. Mr. Calloway, the HOA welcomes transparency. On Tuesday afternoon around 2:50, you opened my mailbox and removed an envelope. I'd like to know what was in it and why. The pool went quiet. The lifeguards stopped pretending to be bored. Dale lowered his magazine half an inch and didn't move it again. Karen laughed a small, performative laugh calibrated for the audience. Mr. Calloway, are you accusing a board president of theft? You moved here 8 months ago. I run this neighborhood. The HOA has the right to inspect. Any non-compliant correspondence that affects property values, that clause isn't in the covenants. I read them. She lifted her chin. Your mailbox is HOA property. Always has been once you sign the deed. That mailbox became part of the community amenity infrastructure, and the board has the right. My mailbox, I said calmly, was approved by the United States Postal Service in 2007. Federal law makes interfering with it a felony up to 5 years. She blinked. It was the first time in 8 months I had seen her blink in public. Then she did the thing I had been waiting for her to do. She reached into her tote bag, pulled out a fresh orange notice she had pre-printed for me, pre-printed before this conversation had even started, and laid it on the deck chair beside her. $250 a day in fines for obstruction of HOA compliance review. We can put a lien on this house, she said loud enough that the lifeguards could now definitely hear. If you keep this up, we've done it before. Ask anyone here. I looked around the pool. Nobody made eye contact with me. Mrs. Hendrickson's hands had folded very tightly around her water bottle. I took the orange notice. I folded it in half. I put it in my back pocket on top of the print out of Title 18. Section 1708, I'll take that under advisement. I said I walked home. I did not call my lawyer that night. I did not call the local police. I sat in my office and looked at the locked steel case on the top shelf for about 20 minutes before I took it down. The leather wallet, the federal ID with a photo of a younger man, the type sheet of 7 cell numbers. The 4th number belonged to a man I had trained as a junior inspector in 2003. Who had stood beside me on a loading dock in Cincinnati during a sting operation that put 4 postal employees in federal prison, and who was now a senior agent at the USPS Office of Inspector General. I had not called him in 6 years. I dialed, he answered. On the second ring, he said my name like it was a question. Then like it was an answer. I need a favor, I said. Off the record for now. I think a HOA board president in my neighborhood is intercepting federal mail. I have 6 weeks of camera footage and a logbook. There's an 81-year-old victim with a missing Social Security letter. I think it's bigger than me. He was quiet for about 4 seconds. Send me the footage, send me the logbook. I'll open a file tonight. I sent both before I went to bed. She thought she had just put a new resident in his place at the pool. She had actually just opened her own federal case file. The Monday after the pool, I started knocking on doors. I did it slowly. I did not bring a clipboard, because I had spent 28 years watching what clipboards do to a conversation in a residential neighborhood. I brought a blank, yellow legal pad in one hand and a thermos of coffee in the other. And I wore the kind of fleece pullover that signals to a stranger at their front door that you are not selling anything and not asking for money. I started at Mrs. Alvarez's because she already trusted me. And I asked her one question. In the last 6 months, have you been missing mail? She nodded before I finished the sentence. She sat at my kitchen table with my yellow pad for 40 minutes and produced a list: 2 Social Security adjustment letters, 1 mortgage statement, 1 thank you card from a great niece in El Paso, which she had been told was sent in November, and which she had until the morning we sat at my table together, quietly assumed had been lost in her own house. She cried once briefly when she got to the great niece. Then she signed the bottom of the page. I went next to the Nguyen's. Mr. Nguyen answered the door in his work shirt. When I asked the question, he turned his head and called something in Vietnamese to his wife, and she came to the door drying her hands on a dish towel. The Nguyen's had received a $400 IRS penalty in October because they had never gotten a notice the IRS swore had been mailed in August. They had paid it like Mrs. Alvarez. They had assumed the problem was on their end. Mrs. Nguyen put it more plainly. We thought we did something wrong. We didn't even argue, Mr. Nguyen, before he handed the signed page back to me. Asked me a question I had been waiting for someone to ask. Mr. Calloway, are you a lawyer? I said no. Then why are you doing this? I told him I had been a federal investigator for a long time, and that I was tired of watching her do this to good people. I did not say which agency. I just said the word federal, because the word federal tends to be enough for people who have spent their lives respecting it. Mr. Nguyen nodded once and shook my hand. I knocked on 12 doors that week. 6 said yes, the young couple on the corner. Marcus and Lily married the previous September. We're missing 11 wedding cards. Lily showed me a notebook in which she had written down every gift the cards were supposed to contain, because she had been embarrassed to ask her relatives twice. 200 from an uncle in Tampa, 150 from a great aunt in Phoenix. A check from her grandmother, Amount unknown, because her grandmother had refused to tell her how much. The way grandmothers sometimes do. The Hendricksons were missing 2 property tax notices, Dale. The retired engineer was missing a quarterly dividend statement and 3 letters from his daughter at university. 2 more houses on the next block had stories nearly identical to Mrs. Alvarez's letters that had arrived weeks late, half shoved into the wrong box with seals cut clean. By Friday, I had 6 notarized statements, 12 pages of incident dates, and a quiet, controlled fury I had not felt about any case in 15 years. I went home and pulled ring